What is up, everybody? Happy Tuesday night. Going a day earlier here on Shout a Buffalo Bills football podcast. He is Ryan Talbot. He is Michael F. Florio joining us tonight on the show. I'm Matt Perino. Mike, I put it out a few minutes ago on Twitter that you were joining us, and we got a bunch of I hate Mike Florio. I don't think that they're talking about the same Mike Florio. Do you get this all the time? Is this a constant battle that you face?
Yeah, it happens a lot. It has happened less lately, but there was like one incident the season was coming to an end or something like that. I don't remember what the tweet was about, but someone tweeted me, "Oh, it was I've been very vocal defending Tua all year last year." And someone was like, "Well, tell this to your father." And I was like, "Well, he is not my dad." And that tweet blew. People were like, "Oh my god, I thought for sure he was your dad. This is the biggest revelation of the football season." Yeah. No relation whatsoever.
That is awesome. That is awesome. And Ryan, you go back with Michael. You used to do a podcast with him years ago.
Yeah, we were just talking pre-show, at least the Tyrod Taylor days. I feel like it might have gone back even further than that, but good to be talking Bills with him tonight with obviously a franchise QB here in Buffalo. Much better days here than some of those other teams that we've talked about over the years.
For those tuning in, Michael grew up in New York City, rooting for the Bills, actually. He joked before we started that his dad told him that he had to root for the one true New York football team, which we'll get into a little bit later in the show. Really, what I wanted to bring you on for, I really enjoyed a Twitter thread that you put out right after the season. I thought it was thought-provoking. I thought it was as detailed a thread as you were going to get on the Bills. I mean, it went viral. I looked at the top tweet today, going back and over the last couple of days, and I think it had 1 million views or engagements, however Twitter does that thing. So a lot of people's eyes found it, and I think it was a great conversation starter to the offseason. But I also wanted to bring you on to see now 3 months later how maybe some of the things that you pointed out after that Cincinnati Bengals game, how things were addressed by the Bills this offseason. We're going to get into all of that in a moment. Let me ask you this before we get too far into it. Were you surprised at how much interaction that thread got when you put it out?
Yeah. This thread has it's easily the most viewed tweet that I have ever tweeted. And I'm someone who's quite active on Twitter, so that says a lot. But this started out as like it was gonna be just like one tweet. Like it was literally the day after the playoff loss. Like I was upset like any other Bills fan. I just was running through it in my head over and over again, and I was like, I need to get these thoughts out some way, somehow. So I was like, let me just go to Twitter. And what was supposed to be like a tweet, maybe a couple of tweets, became like, by the time I realized it was like over, I think it was like 10 tweets, maybe a little bit more. And I was like, you know what? I'm just going to put this out there. And I did it. And then I like went to the gym because I was like, I need to get this frustration out. And came back and I was like, wow, this was blowing up. And then for like a week, and I apparently was popular in Buffalo because a lot of the fans kind of agreed with what I said. And I wasn't trying to be super harsh on the team, but I was like, hey, this is a Buffalo Bills team that for the last year or so, I feel like everyone kind of handpicked them, so they got kind of a pass for some blemishes. And like, let's talk about this because I think things could be a lot better. So hopefully there's no bad blood if anyone in the building read that, because I'm still a Bills fan. I'd still love to be, do anything with the team. But yeah, this was just me kind of as a Bills fan firing from the hip.
I think there's a lot of good stuff in here, and we're going to, and again, I think what you pointed out there is really important. Like the whole point of this was after another playoff loss, like a disappointing season end, like some good points to kind of talk about. Before we start off on this, Ryan, of course, we are T-minus 5 days from our return to Wingnuts. Every month, we are doing a show at Wingnuts, a live show. Come out, you eat some wings. They're the best in town. Bills rookies went there a couple days ago. Were absolutely blown away. Dorian Williams tweeted out that nobody's got anything on Buffalo chicken wings, and his first experience was at Wingnuts, the official chicken wing of Shout a Buffalo Bills football podcast. You'll get great beers, great wings, Bills talk with Ryan and I. It's going to be a great time, Ryan.
Yeah, looking forward to Saturday night. Always a great time at Wingnuts. Always a great crowd. So, Bills Mafia, come before the show, hang out with Matt and myself. Come after, obviously, stick around and we'll chat you up. And we always enjoy interacting with the Bills fans.
All right. So for those who haven't read the thread, I have it up on the screen here. This will be in audio format, so I'm going to read through these first 3 tweets, and then we'll get into the conversation. Yesterday, I said that Josh Allen covers up a lot of bad for the Bills, and people were quick to say he's not without blame. And obviously, no QB is when their team loses that way. But I don't think people fully realize how much he has covered up for people in that building. Sean McDermott likely isn't going to go anywhere, but for someone whose top qualities are leadership and defensive prowess, he always seems to get outcoached in the big games, and the defense always seems to be the ones crumbling. The last 4 playoff exits blew a multiple score second half lead, blown out by KC, 13-second kickoff, and yesterday, the Bengals game. The defense can bully bad teams in the regular season, but can't stop a good offense when they have to. At this point, it's a trend and an excusable one at that. And so that's where I wanted to start. Where's your confidence meter at heading into the season with Sean McDermott, knowing all of those immediate aftermath thoughts that you had? And then also keep it in perspective, the success that he's had over the last 7 seasons, or 6 seasons, I should say, since he took over in 17.
It depends on what we're talking about. Like, if we're talking about the regular season, my confidence meter is at a 10. Sean McDermott has shown us that in the regular season, he can be a great head coach. He can get the Bills to places that 5 years ago, like Ryan and I were joking when he used to come on their show back in the day, this was rookie year Josh Allen and earlier, like, at that point in time, winning the division back-to-back years would seem like a pipe dream. And there are moments where I have to kind of take a step back and be like, enjoy what this team is right now, because remember what it was for so long. So in that regard, I have a lot of faith in McDermott for the regular season. He doesn't, I know there's a handful of games like 2 years ago, the Jacksonville game, but for the most part, the Bills beat the teams that they are supposed to beat. And the teams that are at their level in the regular season, he has performed very well against. Like, they beat the Chiefs the last 2 seasons in the regular season. Then when we get to the playoffs, I don't know what happens. It's like he coaches scared or something. I don't know, but for some reason in the playoffs, I think a big part of it is you're much more evenly matched in the playoffs. Like, the Bengals are an insanely tough team, the Chiefs, and they're both well-coached organizations. So I think when he's facing someone at his level, I don't know if it's he overthinks it or what it is. I guess if we're being timely right now, the different sport, but like the comparison I would make is like Doc Rivers. Like, that's who he's in jeopardy of becoming, a great regular season head coach, someone who can get you, you know, to the playoffs and maybe even win a game or 2 in the playoffs. But after that, when you're facing the top of the top, I have trouble saying the confidence meter is very high right now in McDermott in those instances.
And that's more than fair. Like you said, you pointed out the amount of points, the yards that they've given up in the playoffs. After the season was over, we really don't know everything that happened with Leslie Frazier. We just kind of found out he's stepping away for a year is what we were told. And Sean McDermott's taking over the play calling duties. So first and foremost, did the Leslie Frazier development stepping away say anything to you about maybe the self-scouting for this defense and the issues that they've had in the past? Is it something where now McDermott really, it's really on him because he can't say, well, it was Leslie calling the plays. I have the utmost confidence in him. He's calling the plays now this season. And are you expecting anything different from him than maybe what we've seen from this defense in the past?
The Leslie Frazier stuff was really, really strange. And you said, like, we don't really know the full story there. Part of me thinks maybe Frazier just wanted a year off, or maybe there's something behind the scenes we don't know. The more cynical part of me thinks that, like, McDermott was told, like, hey, this is your make or break it year. And maybe he's being like, all right, if this is it and I need to get the job done now, I'm going to go down on my own terms. And I don't think Leslie Frazier is without blame either. Like, he gets all the praise for the regular season. And one thing that I put in this thread is that, like, the Bills defense does a great job of bullying bad teams. Like, when they're playing lesser competition. You can expect them to get turnovers and get sacks, pressure on the quarterback, all of that. But where I think he struggled pretty badly the last couple of years is adjustments in the playoffs. Not just like in-game adjustments, but just adjusting to the teams that you're playing. Like, and I know it's all because of Tyreek Hill and that long touchdown he had, but like in that 13-second Chiefs game, the Bills defenders are lining up 10, 11 yards away from the Chiefs receivers. And that's an instance where like you want to, in my opinion, I think you'd want to play a little bit closer and try to make them make a quick decision. It's going to be interesting to see what this defense is going to look like without Leslie Frazier there and with it all on McDermott. I'm expecting them to be a little bit more aggressive. But he has no more excuses now, right? Like if this defense fails and they fail in a big moment like they have each of the last 4 seasons, I think then we're going to firmly point the finger at McDermott. And it, again, it's kind of unfair because in my lifetime, he's been the best head coach for them by far. But if they fail again this year and don't get, at least to the AFC Championship game, I think there is a possibility that this is his final year as the Bills head coach.
Wow. I mean, I think there's a lot to unpack there. I want to go back to what you were talking about with the Doc Rivers comparison, because I think it's a really good one. I can't remember what it was about, but I recently went and looked at Mike Tomlin's career record, and it's almost percentage-wise, regular season, playoffs, win percentage. It's identical to McDermott's. And they're trending to be almost exact, the same winning percentage over the course of his career if he continues on this track. The one difference is, of course, Tomlin had that Super Bowl in his second or third season. Andy Reid, who was Sean McDermott's kind of mentor, was run out of Philly after years and years and years of the same thing that you're talking about, like failures in the playoffs. My question to you is, okay, they get to the other side of this thing. Let's hypothetically say there's another playoff failure, right? And they move on from Sean McDermott. Is that, from a fan's perspective, worrisome? Because they got to nail the next coach, knowing that they didn't nail the couple before him. At least one. Ryan, you could probably call this better. Did the Pagulas hire, was it Duran before Rex Ryan?
I don't believe that they were here. No, they were not here for Duran. No,
so
Duran
Rex Ryan was their first head coach hire?
Rex was their first. Yep. And then it kind of went from there. So, yes, Rex was the premier hire.
So I guess, do you think if they move on from McDermott, the grass is greener on the other side, I guess is my question.
Not a guarantee, no. But I think when you have someone like Josh Allen, and look, I get told on a lot of my shows that I'm a homer because Josh Allen is, one, he's my favorite football player, but two, not only do I think he is the second best quarterback on the planet, I think that he is asked to do more for his football team than any player in the NFL is. But when you have a talent as dynamic and explosive as Josh Allen, we've seen that window can last a long time. And if you ask a Chiefs fan right now, they're probably going to tell you their window is until Patrick Mahomes retires. And that makes sense. But we've also seen these windows slam shut. We've seen quarterbacks get hurt, or the Bills are heading to this weird time where it happens a lot with franchise quarterbacks, where you have to rebuild the entire roster while having your franchise quarterback under contract, under a big contract. We've seen many teams have to kind of go that route. Like the Packers struggled for years to build a competent roster around Aaron Rodgers. So I don't think you can ever take it for granted, and you can't waste it. If the Bills were having this sort of success based on the defense and they didn't have Josh Allen, they just had a pretty good quarterback, yeah, then I think, okay, we ride out with Sean McDermott. We don't want to risk this getting worse. But when you have Josh Allen in this landscape that is the NFL today, I think you need to have a more offensive mindset. So while advocating potential, yes, it is risky. I get it, but I think it's a risk that you kind of have to roll the dice on. I'm cool giving McDermott another year, especially because last year, I don't think the Bills got a fair shake, and we could talk more about that later. But and I'm very optimistic for this upcoming season. But if things don't work out again this year, I think you kind of have to be like, we need to roll the dice and see if we could bring in an offensive mind, and see if we could get this to the next level. Because look, you guys live in Buffalo. I'm in LA now. You guys know better than me. That city is starved for a championship, and they deserve, the fans deserve one. And I think Josh Allen is the quarterback to bring it to them. I just don't know if the other pieces around him are right yet.
Speaking of pieces around him being right, the next part of your thread here, Brandon Beane gets such high regard for finding Josh Allen, but that 2018 class was the last of his that had any Pro Bowl players. So much capital has been wasted on undersized defensive linemen who can't generate pressure against a backup offensive line, like we saw in the Bengals game. They drafted a corner in the first and were too scared to use him for most of the year, despite the secondary issues. We've covered that in great detail over this offseason. The big addition to the offense was pass catching running backs, only to never throw the ball to the running backs. The O-line got ignored despite clear issues. And the frustrating part, it's like there was no real plan. The game plan didn't fit the personnel at all. The Bills receiver room had two receivers who couldn't win outside or downfield and a bunch of slot guys, and then operated on an offense built around the deep ball, right?
So that, that and your previous tweet that you said about Josh Allen having to do too much. This year, what does the draft haul tell you about what Brandon Beane has done in the past, and maybe perhaps, the lessons that he's learned from those draft classes and the direction he went this year?
First, if you can't feel the frustrated Bills fan coming out of me when you're reading even me hearing you read it back, I'm like, yeah, I was a little harsh on them, but it was because of how frustrated I was after that game. I am a fan of what they did in this offseason. They kept the defense together for the most part outside of Trey Edmonds, who we knew was going to leave. I was anticipating Poyer leaving as well. I did not expect him to be back. I liked a lot of the additions they did there, but then in the draft, to use the first pick on Dalton Kincaid, I was hoping for a wide receiver. I know they're saying he's going to be used as a receiver, and they're going to use more 12 and use him as like the Cole Beasley. All of that excites me because last year the Bills had the lowest percent of yards after the catch by far in the NFL. So they didn't have a playmaker who could do anything after the catch. And I talk here about, how they had two wide receivers who could win out wide, and that was Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis. Gabe Davis hurts his ankle. Gabe Davis doesn't look like himself the whole season pretty much. But even beyond that, Gabe Davis to me is someone that I would like so much more as like a wide receiver 3 that could be like a luxury rather than someone you have to depend on. His hands are very questionable. Like, he'll make amazing plays, but then he'll make just as many frustrating plays that you're like, if this guy caught it, this game is different. Bengals game included. And what we saw down the stretch last year was teams were willing to throw 2, sometimes 3 defenders in Stephon Diggs' way. And one thing that I was very vocal about last year was that the Bills would then just go away from Stephon Diggs. And I'm like, don't do that. Like, then you are willingly doing what the defense wants you to do. You're taking away Stephon Diggs, and they're saying no one else here can beat us. And really, they were right. Like, who was winning for the Bills outside of Stephon Diggs? Sometimes Gabe Davis. You had a bunch of slot receivers are supposed to win after the catch, and they couldn't. So I think Dalton Kincaid, if used properly, could be a great weapon. Look, I'm not going to say he's going to be the next Travis Kelce. I know a lot of people are saying that, but I comped him to Dallas Goedert before the draft, and I think that's a great addition for the Bills offense that needs a little bit of a makeover and needs a short target that could win after the catch and kind of open things up more downfield for Josh Allen and the Bills. And then the second round pick on Osiris, like, I thought he was going to be a first round pick. So when he fell to the second, I thought that was great value. He's already getting hyped up from rookie minicamp. I expect him to start this year to be a huge blocker that can help the run game. I like too that they went out and we always hear that they want Josh Allen to run less, but then last year their backfield was Devin Singletary, James Cook, and Naheem Hines. Where's your power runner going to come from there? It had to be Josh Allen. Now you have Damian Harris, and to back him up, there's Latavius Murray. So I think the Bills are finally putting the pieces in play to be like, hey, we need to have more around Josh Allen than just Stephon Diggs, and we were asking too much of him last season. So I am encouraged. I really like what they did this offseason, although their offense is going to have to be very different because they had the second fewest 2 tight end sets last year. So naturally just think there's going to be a change there after they took Kincaid.
Well, Brandon Bean would like you to call it the personnel package 11 and a half, Michael, because Dalton Kincaid will be a wide receiver and a tight end. No, let me read these next 3 parts of the thread, and then I want to get into something that I actually heard this week that I think is a really interesting conversation that the 3 of us can have. There was no quick pass aspect to this offense all year, which you talked about. Slot wide receiver role vanished. Allen was expected to scramble to avoid pressure and find someone deep, which is even harder when your best deep threat is questionable hands and routinely drops well-placed like ones. The Bills hired a first-year play caller in the most offensive-driven era in NFL history in their championship window, despite not having won a Super Bowl in over 30 years. Just short-sighted moves that never seemed to gel with any sort of actual plan. There was never any situational football with this team. Yesterday, maybe the biggest play of the day, 3rd and 2. They throw 40 yards down the field, then punted. It largely felt like Dorsey would pick a play at random, and not just yesterday, this was all year long. They can out-talent teams in the regular season, and Josh Allen is a unicorn who can play hero ball and save the day most of the time. But if he has an off game, this team has no shot of being an actual good team. This roster is very flawed, and now it's aging with little cap. So shout out to Tyler Dunn, who does a great job over at golongtd.com. He had on Isaiah McKenzie, who's now with the Colts, on his podcast this week. And it was an excellent conversation. The fans got to ask some questions. And one thing that came up was a really good, blunt question. Do players like Ken Dorsey? And the feedback coming back is everybody loves Ken Dorsey. But what's the one thing that the constant storyline coming out of training camp last year? Ken Dorsey is this dog, this aggressive competitor. And we saw that play out in a lot of ways during the season. Like, they were throwing the long ball like over and over again. And I think part of that is the aggressive nature of Ken Dorsey in general. So I think, to your point, yes, there was some growing pains with Dorsey in place. And McKenzie said, like, he was often used as like a decoy. Like, they'd send him down the field, try to take attention away from Gabe. And when it wasn't working, he didn't feel like he was involved in the offense. They forgot a lot of that stuff, like that short part of the field. Like, he's a gunslinger mindset. And so he put the offense in those kinds of situations, and they forgot what, that Cole Beasley role meant to the offense. This is some really good stuff from Isaiah McKenzie. How much, though, like with Dorsey looking into year 2, could this reset help them? Obviously, they went out and got different flavors of players. Deontay Hardy is a little bit different than Isaiah McKenzie. Sherfield brings a dynamic, and then obviously Kincaid. How much do you think that year 1 to year 2 reset, evaluating what went wrong and prioritizing that short and intermediate area, could kind of unlock things for all parties?
I think it could go a long way. I know I came off kind of harshly on Dorsey there, and I was a fan of the move when they hired him solely because it's what Josh Allen wanted. And my viewpoint is, like, when you have a franchise quarterback, you make him happy. And if he was supporting for Ken Dorsey, cool. But when Dorsey took over, I expected it to look a lot how it did under Brian Daboll. And I continue to think maybe the Bills let the wrong coach leave a year ago, because with Brian Daboll, like, he was able to, like, the thing that we give the most credit for with Brian Daboll is that he was able to reel Josh Allen back a little bit. Like, Josh Allen wants to win so badly and is so competitive that sometimes, like, he will, and he has the utmost confidence in his arm, which why wouldn't you if you have an arm like that? But sometimes he forces throws that he probably shouldn't be making. And early in his career, like, the hero Josh was the thing that we were like, if that can get reeled in a little bit and he can learn to pick his spots when not to do that, this guy's going to be unstoppable. And that's what happened the final year with Brian Daboll. Like, that's why Josh Allen was an MVP candidate. That's why he had him 13 seconds away from beating the Chiefs and being in the AFC Championship game with the best playoff run that I think I've ever seen a quarterback put up. But you talk about how aggressive Dorsey wants to be. I think he fed into that bad habits of Josh Allen. Like, 3rd and 2, we're throwing a 40-yard pass. Yeah, I know Josh Allen wants to throw a 40-yard pass there, right. But as the coach and play caller, it's your job to be like, hey, we need to play situational football. I'm cool with you throwing that 40-yard pass if the idea is we're going for it on 4th down and we have a play that we trust, or we're going to let Allen run, something like that. But if it's we're going to throw a 40-yard pass and if it's not caught, we're going to punt, what are we doing? Like, that is terrible situational football. So yeah, I think the personnel is better this year because last season it was really thin, and I think they did a good job. Like, Deontay Hardy is someone on a per route basis in his career who's been up there with some of the elite wide receivers, and Sherfield is another guy that gets a lot of credit for wherever he's played. He's always been a very useful like role player. So I do think the Bills did a really nice job in that regard, but Dorsey needs to look back at last season and not only see some philosophy changes that he needs to make, because I agree that Cole Beasley role needs to be there. Like, not only did that help get the ball out of Allen's hands quicker, but it also helped open stuff up down the field, because if you have to be worried about the slot receiver catching almost 100 passes, which is what Cole Beasley was doing yearly, it just helps open up so much. You can't put 2-3 defenders every single play on Stephon Diggs. And the thing that stood out to me with Ken Dorsey, and that Josh Allen, I think, got entirely too much hatred for this last year. The red zone turnovers, from 2018 through 2021, so 4 seasons, Josh Allen threw a red zone interception on 1% of his passes. That went up to 5% last season. So to me, what changed? The play caller. Like, to me, that's much more on Ken Dorsey and the type of offense they were running in the red zone than it was on Josh Allen. Yes, did I think Allen forced it at times and made some bad decisions? Of course, he's not without blame. But I don't think you go from being what I was calling the best red zone quarterback in the league to one of the worst overnight. Like, something changed, and it was the play caller, in my opinion.
Yeah, and there were even some plays you'd look back at and you'd see 2 players in the same spot or going in the same areas, and it just didn't make sense logistically. But staying on the Dorsey conversation, obviously the play calling from Brian Daboll to Ken Dorsey was different, but I felt like Daboll was really good at reeling Allen in emotionally as well. And when he did something that was a boneheaded play, Daboll would be there and would be talking him through it. There were times where he chewed him out, especially early on in his career on the bench, and we saw him do that with Daniel Jones last year. How difficult is it for a guy like Dorsey to have that conversation with Allen when he's up in the press box like he was 1 year ago, and he can't be there right next to him saying, hey, you made the wrong read, or here's what you did? Is that something where maybe we could also see a philosophy change from Dorsey in terms of where he calls the plays this year?
I think potentially I am okay with him being up in the booth because it allows him to kind of see like all 22 and everything. So to me, that I've never even really considered that, and maybe that is a big deal that needs to change. And if so, hopefully the Bills brass knows that. I also think it's different when you're like Brian Daboll and you're like, hey, I've been with you and kind of like we've been on this ride together. Then when Ken Dorsey comes in and he's like, hey, you're the franchise quarterback, the MVP candidate, the Super Bowl favorite for a reason, the MVP favorite. Like, Josh Allen was all of that last year coming into the season. And like for a first-year play caller, I think it's, especially early on, like, you're not going to feel comfortable probably chewing him out like Brian Daboll did. So I'm hoping that maybe having that year to work together and the ups and the downs, hopefully they learn from it. I'm okay with giving Dorsey another year, but I think if it doesn't work out this year, we should, like, the Bills need to strongly consider bringing in a proven offensive mind, whichever one is available next season.
The most interesting dynamic of the Daboll to Dorsey shift for me was that I think you kind of hinted at this a little bit, Michael, is like Daboll like grew Josh from a baby in this league, right? Like, so like that dynamic at the beginning, they had that established. Daboll was the power figure of the relationship and like really molded him in a lot of ways. Whereas Ken was like, his brother, right? Like the quarterback's coach in the room, like they were having really competitive dudes. And like, you'd see him kind of, vibing on the sidelines at times. And then that kind of shifted last year. And we even saw like early in the season when Ken went viral with his like absolute meltdown in the press box after not making it, like having it go this way in Miami. Like that, it's almost like he's trying to learn the job of offensive coordinator. He's now got a quarterback who is the guy in the NFL. And if he's not the guy, he's like 1B, right? Like, of course it's Mahomes and then like the next tier, whatever. So it's like all of that. And then on top of that, like you're a first time play caller, and you laid it out perfectly. The success, lack thereof for first year play callers in the NFL. It's almost like they were working with a lot of different dynamics that I think won't necessarily be the case. They could do a lot of self-scouting this year to figure out a different path forward and to put everybody in a spot to be successful.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I was starting to think about as you guys were talking is you talk about like how competitive Ken Dorsey is and how aggressive he is. And we had already talked about like how a big part with Josh Allen is dialing it back a little bit and having him play even keeled. Well, if your offensive coordinator isn't that way and your star wide receiver, I love Stephon Diggs, but he is anything but even keeled. If there's that much emotion and fire up like all around Josh Allen, like, yes, I understand the quarterback is supposed to be the leader, but we know how Josh is. So like, to me, I would like to see the OC. Maybe this is something that Dorsey's working on this offseason and we'll see better next year. But I think he should be, hey, Josh, dial it down a little bit. You are, like you said, the 1B in this league. And there's, when you're on your game, no one can touch you. Like, that should be what is going in his ear, not, hey, let's throw 40 yards every single play. And 3rd and 2, let's try to see if we could throw 40 yards here. And to me, a big thing of that playoff game was, I don't know why Lou Anarumo is still a defensive coordinator and doesn't have a head coaching job. He shut down the Bills. He's figured out how to shut down the Chiefs. Like, this guy is who you want going up against the top quarterbacks. But my, oh my, was it a like running circles around moment. Like, I felt like he just ran circles all over Ken Dorsey in that playoff game, and that needs to change.
Yeah. So one other question on the personnel. We talked about it. Brandon Beane goes out and he drafts James Cook in round 2. Trade deadline, they bring in Naheem Hines, and it wasn't just for the kick return, punt return aspect. It was another pass catching weapon. And it just never went to these guys. They never utilized them. So, one, is this something that you're expecting to change from year 1 to year 2? And if it doesn't change, where was the disconnect? Because I can't imagine Brandon Beane going out and then acquiring one player at the deadline, drafting one player in round 2, without him almost not having the blessing of Ken Dorsey, but having Ken Dorsey kind of tell him, yeah, these are guys that I can utilize.
Yeah, I wouldn't imagine that like that was a conversation that was had where Dorsey was like, hey, we need a better pass catching. Because, yeah, like you said, James Cook was known as more of a receiving back than a running back in college, and Naheem Hines is a pass-catching specialist. Part of me thinks that the conversation was like, hey, Josh, you don't have to run as much because when you roll out, you could dump it off to the running back here. But that just wasn't what the game plan was. It never really translated to the field, because what I love about Josh Allen is when he's scrambling with his legs, he's keeping his eyes 30, 40 yards downfield to see if someone got open, and because we know him on the run is as deadly as anyone, or he's just going to get that 10 yards himself. Like, he's not going to dump it off because he'll hold it to the last second, because stuff like that Dawson Knox touchdown in the playoffs a couple years ago, or any of these crazy throws where he's holding the ball till probably later than he should be holding it and making something out of nothing. So I don't know if it's that they need more designed screen passes, if they need to kind of drill it into Allen's head more, but my thinking was the Bills, because even like, let's go a step further. They brought in Duke Johnson in the preseason last year, like who's a pass catching specialist. Like, they were trying so hard, it seemed, to get someone to fit that job, that role, and then it never translated to the field. It was one of those things that did not make sense at all to me. And the other thing, like, not using your rookies. I understand the rookie wall, and it's something that Sean McDermott is probably more vocal than any head coach in the league. And you had Super Bowl aspirations. I get all that. But, like, why? Why such a refusal to use your rookies even late in the season when you needed them? That's why, like, I give a lot of, I do fantasy football and stuff, but that's why I'm a little skeptical about Dalton Kincaid, not in a real life aspect, but like in a fantasy aspect, because I'm like, is McDermott going to make him wait 9 weeks before he starts to really let him get going. It is something that I don't fully understand with how I get early in the season, but like late in the year, you really needed those guys, and I think they could have contributed, and they weren't really given the chance till absolutely like insanely late in the year.
I think the whole more talk about the dynamic of everything, like Sean taking over the defense in the way that he is really going to leave Ken Dorsey on more of an island. And you have to believe that like some of the conversation this offseason is okay, especially after trading up again to get Dalton Kincaid. Okay, we have to have a plan for this guy. Like we have to play him. Like they were answering for Kyrie Elam all the way up until the playoff game. I mean, weekly questions about what's going on with Kyrie Elam. I don't know if Sean McDermott necessarily wants to go through that whole situation again. And it's funny, there was some foreshadowing that Bean had on this whole thing. He said 19, 20, 21. He didn't reach for a cornerback because of this exact outcome that played out last year. He didn't want to be asking or answering questions constantly about a guy that doesn't end up winning the job as a rookie. Like, I think personally, like there were really good moments for Kyrie Elam last year, enough to where I wanted to see a bigger sample size. But I do think maybe inside that building, there wasn't enough confidence in the player to put him out there. Whether or not, like, we could argue the semantics of Dane Jackson and his ceiling and Elam's ceiling. Like, I'm all for playing Elam, but I think from internally, from a defensive perspective, they didn't have enough trust in him, especially with the injury stuff, to put him in that position. But then, you look around the league and the way that first rounders are impacting teams. And I agree, like we've talked about this ad nauseum. They have to find a way to make Dalton Kincaid an impact player. And also, this is a good question, maybe a transition here. What does that mean for Dawson Knox?
I think Dawson Knox is he's gonna be playing that number 2 tight end role a lot. I think I don't think he's suddenly gonna be like a big blocker or anything like that, because I am hopeful that they're telling the truth with Kincaid. We're going to line him up in the slot a lot, use him like Cole Beasley, and then Knox could be your traditional inline tight end. But like, I think the days of Dawson Knox being like the second or third option in this passing game are long gone. And I think that's the role he belongs in. Like, Knox is a good talent, but if he is someone who's, and I believe last season he had the 3rd most targets on the team, I don't know if I love that for him. I think he's better suited to be like a red zone threat for them. He clearly has issues winning after the catch. So for me, I think Dalton Kincaid from year one should lead this tight end room in targets. I think the upside is just that much higher with him. But it is a good problem to have. Most teams don't even have one tight end they feel comfortable throwing the ball to. So to have 2 of them and to be able to mix up. I think that was another thing with the Bills last year is they became very predictable. Like 3 wide receiver sets more often than not, and it was largely going to be the same 3 receivers with not really moving them on the field at all. And that's why I wanted a receiver. Like, I thought maybe like, any of the top 4 would have been great to get, but because especially all but Quentin Johnston could line up all over the field in the slot as well. Like, part of me wants them to use Stephon Diggs more how other teams use their wide receiver ones. Like, Tyreek Hill and Justin Jefferson are lining up for 3rd, if not more, of their snaps in the slot. Like, let's make life easy on Stephon Diggs at times, especially during those stretches where late in the season last year, he would disappear for games, and it wasn't his fault. Like, they were just like, hey, they're putting extra man coverage on him. We're going to go elsewhere. Why not try to get creative? Put him in the slot at times, move him like all over the field, do some receiver screens. Like, to me, there was no creativity with this Bills offense, and that is concerning because in today's day and age, the Chiefs are dominating, and they are the most creative offense in football. The Bengals do a lot of creative stuff. The Eagles. So to have such a one-dimensional offense last year, and like I said in the thread, it was Josh Allen either has to beat you deep or he's going to scramble and try to beat you deep. Like, it became way too predictable and way too easy to stop. And that's why there was such long periods where they wouldn't score points in games, because it was Josh Allen has to do something amazing to beat you, or like we're just going to end up punting the ball.
So as a follow-up to, Josh Allen having to do too much, we've mentioned some of the receivers they brought in, Hardy and Sherfield, and obviously you have year 2 of Khalil Shakir. are there enough weapons at wide receiver behind Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis to believe that they can, one, make an impact on this team, and two, kind of close the gap on the Chiefs and the Bengals and what's just becoming a powerhouse AFC conference?
I feel better about it than last year, but I mean, I'd be lying if I look at the other top teams. Like, okay, the Chiefs are a little bit weird, but when you have Kelsey and Mahomes, it's a little bit easier to get by. But like the Bengals, like everyone, like, the new conversation now is that Joe Burrow is better than Josh Allen. I strongly disagree. I'm like, he's throwing to two otherworldly wide receivers. The Eagles did that with their two receivers. Like, a lot of the top teams are adding more and more pass catchers around them. So I feel better than I did a year ago about that wide receiver room, but I can't say with confidence that I think they've done enough. I think there's still a way they could go out and do enough in the form of DeAndre Hopkins. Like, I want this guy to be a Bill 2 months ago when he posted the Buffalo Soldier meme on his Instagram. I was like, that's it. He's a Bill. He's working out with Von Miller. He's randomly talking. Like, I don't know if you guys saw this. He did an interview with the fantasy guys at CBS Sports, and they were like, you could be traded. And he was like, I love Josh Allen. I love Stephon Diggs. I love everything they're doing in Buffalo right now. And he just spends like the minute answer he gave talking up the Bills. Like, clearly this is a guy that wants to be in Buffalo. Go get him. I understand he's almost 30 and he costs a lot of money and stuff. Championship windows don't last forever, especially in the NFL. It can all go away tomorrow. Strike now while you have your chances, my opinion.
Yeah, things like go bad. I mean, by the time training camp gets here, I mean, if Kyler Murray has a little bit of runway to get back and he's playing with, whoever at quarterback, I can't imagine that it's not going to get real hot real quick there. And the one cool thing, if you're Brandon Beane now, is you do have some capital in next year's draft. You made a couple trades to get some day 3 picks next year. You can get a little bit frisky, and to your point, like I feel like he's so adamant about you're never one player away or never one move away until it's like within range and it makes sense and the numbers work out. And then it's like, just do it, because I feel like that's how the Von Miller deal kind of materialized anyway. Do you think, like, offensively, like fundamentally, this thing completely changes with DeAndre Hopkins? And do you have trust in Ken Dorsey to figure out the target? My biggest hesitation on the Hopkins edition is you have a very volatile player in Stephon Diggs from a competitive standpoint. Like, what happens if he somehow becomes like a 1B in that scenario to Hopkins? Does that sit right with him? It's why he wanted out of Minnesota, right? Like, because it was, what's his name? Adam Thielen that they viewed as the number one.
Yeah, I do. I think Stephon Diggs is at a very different point in his career now than he was then. Back then, he had like 1,000-yard season, and that was kind of it. And he was playing the second fiddle role. And he's come here. He's proven to be one of the best wide receivers of his generation. And DeAndre Hopkins he's still very good, but he's not what he was 2-3 years ago. So I do think that there's a situation where this could work, especially if you tell Stephon Diggs, like, hey, remember last year, all those stretches where we couldn't get you the ball because the defense was like throwing 2-3 defenders your way? You're going to get single coverage every single game now because the guy on the opposite side of you is just as good. To me, and you have Josh Allen throwing them the ball. Like, yeah, it's not Case Keenum where they're going to struggle to get 2,000-yard receivers. Like, you could tell me that both of those guys would go for 1,300, and I would believe it, because I think that in this offense with that quarterback, it would just be so hard to stop. And then anything you get out of Dalton Kincaid, Gabe Davis, the rest of the receivers is a luxury on top of that. Plus, we've been very fortunate that Stephon Diggs has been insanely durable. If Stephon Diggs rolls an ankle or something like that, because football is still a very violent game, then this wide receiving core, for lack of a better word, would suck. Like, Gabe Davis is not a true number one. You wouldn't have anyone who's a true number two there. So it's extremely thin. I think there's depth, but that high-end talent isn't there outside of Stephon Diggs. So I think a team like the Bills make a ton of sense to go out and get another big-name receiver. And then you could tell Stephon Diggs, like, hey, this guy's older than you. He's going to fade a year or two before you. Plus, you've been here already. So if we win a Super Bowl, like, you're the guy that's going to get the credit, and you were the star that came here and changed things. But I mean, I know Kincaid, first round pick. I like that. But Stephon Diggs was now over 3 years ago that trade happened. And what big move have they made on offense since then? That's it.
Yeah, no, they've avoided it. They've gone heavy on defense in drafts. They've added premier players in free agency like the Von Miller. And I'm glad you also said, not just Hopkins, because I saw that interview, and anything short of pulling out a chicken wing. I mean, he was pretty much saying he wanted to come to Buffalo. But you said an elite pass catcher. It doesn't have to be Hopkins. And the good thing with the Bills, and going back to what you were talking about, Matt, is the draft capital that they have. And maybe the biggest piece of draft capital they have is that extra third-round pick that they have in their back pocket, because they know Tremaine Edmonds is going to get them that comp pick, and it's going to probably be that third-round pick. So now you have something to play with there on that trade deadline, and you'd love to have someone in from week one, like you said. You don't know when a player's going to go down with an injury, but at the trade deadline, I would really be stunned if the Bills weren't a buyer for a final piece, so to speak, because of that third-round pick. So I'm not going to put you on the spot and say who are some targets or anything like that, but is it realistic that you could see the Bills then being a buyer at the deadline? Like, this is the year that, even though Brandon Beane says we're not going to do it, we're going all in at this point, a la the Rams a few years ago when they made all their moves. Is this something you envision maybe Brandon Beane finally doing this year?
I don't think he's going to do a move where, like, he gives up a first-round pick. That's why I think D-Hop is a perfect candidate, because I'm like, what would it cost? A third-round pick to get him? We're getting a comp third from Trey Edmonds anyway. Like, there you go. But yeah, the issue is, while I could see Beane wanting to do that, there needs to be another team. And while we've seen more in-season trades as of late, and I think it's awesome, we don't tend to see star wide receivers traded in season, at least not ones that, like, can make a huge immediate impact, which part of me is like, why weren't they in on Calvin Ridley last year? Like, he would have been a great number 2 right now with Stephon Diggs, but it's something I would hope for. But it's just like, it's something that I don't think we see a whole lot of. And going back to your last question, if you have to convince Stephon Diggs, just be like, okay, which team with 2 stud wide receivers do you want to use? The Bengals, the Eagles, the Seahawks, like, all of these teams have 2 great wide receivers, and they all put up numbers. Like, the Dolphins, you see it firsthand in our own division. Like it can be done, and it's been proven to work. And I think it's the way the NFL is kind of trending. So yeah, I do think the Bills need another pass catcher, and I think it will be easier to obtain before the season starts.
Michael, this was so awesome. Thank you so much for spending all this time, almost 50 minutes with us. I want to give you a little time here at the end. Let everybody know where they can find you. Obviously, the Twitter handle there, Michael F. Florio, but where they can find you on a weekly basis to follow your coverage.
Yeah, Twitter's the best place right now, at Michael F. Florio, but you could catch me doing a weekly podcast for the NFL Fantasy Football Show. Got some other content there at NFL.com. I also have my own podcast called Florio's Football Show, and then I get some written content coming out there. That's all for Rotoballer. And then on Sundays, if you want more for some reason, every Sunday, I host a show on SiriusXM with Scott the King Engel, so Rotoballer Radio, SiriusXM Fantasy from 3 to 5 p.m. Eastern. But real quick, I don't want to be the doom and gloom guy, because I saw some tweets where people are like, I can't wait for him to ruin my optimism. I am optimistic again because, one, the Bills didn't have their entire defense for a single snap last year. I think that's going to change this year. Two, I had this realization after the season, and I actually, Stevie Johnson was a guest on my podcast a couple weeks ago, and I got to talk to him about this. I was like, listen, the Bills' first Super Bowl is never going to come in a year where they are the hand-picked favorites and they're just going to cruise to victory and win a Super Bowl. But now everyone is counting them out and saying that Allen is overrated and the championship window is closed. This is the kind of year the Bills will win a Super Bowl, I think. But also, like, you look back at last season, outside of the Bengals lost and the Jets lost. Those were the 2 games they really lost all year. The Vikings was an insanely weird game that I don't think happens again if you replay it. And the Dolphins game was obviously very weather related. So I have to remain optimistic about a team that had 2 dud performances out of 19 last year. So the optimism is back, and go Bills.
I think that is a really good point. I don't think there's anybody in the NFL that's more giddy right now than Sean McDermott thumbing through Buffalo Bills Google searches, seeing all these different headlines about Aaron Rodgers and the Cincinnati Bengals. Like, he needs that chip. Like, I felt like at times he had his hands up last year with like, this is not the vibe that we've had so much success with over the years. Like, being the hunted all of a sudden, changes. And it almost, like you mentioned in your thread, like, how do you come out at the end of the thread? You shared a Kyle Brandt video, and it's like, how do you come out in a game like this and not have any juice, not have the energy? And it's like, I wonder if just a season of being the hunted and like going on that win streak and finding a way, they just ran out of it at the end, and they played like that. And I think going into this season and kind of like rebuffing that, nobody believes in us. Like, we got to earn everything we're going to get. Like, he's probably just frothing at the mouth in these meetings.
Yeah, and all the stuff off the field that they had to deal with leading up to that game, because this team maybe had to deal with more off the field stuff than any team in recent history that I could think of. That takes its toll on you. But yeah, I agree. I think the Bills feel more comfortable in that space as, like, we're the underdogs and everyone's counting us out. And I know Bills fans feel much more comfortable there. Last season wasn't even like a 13 or 14-3 season or 13-3. I'm sorry. Should be extremely enjoyable. Last season was not that enjoyable because when they won, it was like, whew, okay, they handled their business. And when they didn't play well or they lost, it was like, what is going on here? I kind of missed from a couple years before that when, like, it was just like no one was expecting them to do anything, and it was just pure, like, highs and fun. But it changes when you have a franchise quarterback.
Ryan, final thought.
Yeah, final thought. First of all, Mike, thanks for your time. Awesome guest. Final thought, Bills Mafia, join us Saturday night. Wing Nuts up in Buffalo. Matt, myself, good wings, good beers, good times. We'll see you then.
He's Michael F. Florio. He's Ryan Talbot. I'm Matt Perino. We will see you next time. Saturday night. Come out. Link is